There exists a rare type of person in this world. Someone who walks through the busy streets of life without looking sideways for approval. Someone who makes important decisions without consulting the opinion of the crowd. Someone who finds peace in their own company without constantly needing the social mirror to confirm their value. This is the story of those who don't seek external validation. A deep journey through the human mind, through the mechanisms of genuine self-esteem and the freedom that few manage to conquer. When we observe the world around us, we are bombarded by an uncomfortable truth. Most people are constantly checking if their clothes are adequate, if their opinions are accepted, if their achievements are recognized, if their lives seem sufficiently interesting in the eyes of others. We live in an era where validation has become a social currency, where likes and comments determine the value of our experiences. But what about those who have escaped this invisible prison? What happens in the mind of someone who genuinely doesn't need this constant approval? The answer is not simple. We're not talking about arrogant people who despise others, nor individuals completely isolated from society. We're talking about human beings who have developed something extraordinary, an internal compass so strong, so precise, that it doesn't need to be constantly calibrated by the external world. These people possess a type of freedom that most of us only imagine in our quietest moments. Before we continue, if you're interested in exploring more content about personal development and deep psychology, subscribe to this channel and leave in the comments what time you're watching this video. Now, let's dive into this fascinating journey. To truly understand these people, we first need to understand where the need for validation comes from in most human beings. From the moment we're born, we are social creatures. A crying baby is seeking validation of their existence, of their needs, of their discomfort. This is a primitive and essential survival mechanism. Our ancestors who didn't seek group approval often didn't survive. Social exclusion, in ancient times, literally meant death. Therefore, our brain was programmed over millions of years to seek belonging, acceptance, and validation. When a child draws a picture and runs to show their parents, they are seeking validation. When a teenager chooses a certain outfit to impress their peers, they are seeking validation. When an adult posts a photo of their vacation on social media, they are, most of the time, seeking validation. This pattern is so deeply rooted in our psyche that most people don't even realize how much their actions are motivated by this relentless search. But then the question arises, how do some people manage to break this pattern? How do they turn off a mechanism that is literally coded in our evolutionary DNA? The truth is they don't turn it off completely. That would be impossible and even dangerous to do. What these people do is something much more sophisticated. They replace the source of external validation with an internal source so robust that the external becomes secondary, almost irrelevant. Imagine for a moment a scientist working in their laboratory. They are trying to solve a complex problem, an equation that no one has been able to decipher before. They work for days, weeks, months, perhaps years. Finally, they find the solution. In that moment of discovery, before telling anyone, before publishing their results, before receiving any external recognition, they feel a deep and genuine joy. This joy doesn't come from the future applause of the scientific community. It comes from something internal, from having solved the puzzle, from having understood something new about the universe. This is the essence of internal validation. People who don't seek external validation have developed this capacity to generate satisfaction internally. They have their own criteria for what is success, for what is valuable, for what is meaningful. And these criteria don't depend on the judgment of third parties. It's not that they don't care about anything or anyone. They simply don't allow external opinions to dictate their sense of self-worth. Let's explore more deeply the psychology behind this. Research in neuroscience shows that when we receive social validation, certain areas of the brain are activated, specifically those related to the reward system. Dopamine is released, creating a pleasurable sensation. This is the same mechanism behind addictive behaviors. And yes, social validation can become an addiction. How many people do you know who check their social media dozens of times a day, anxious for that next dose of approval? People who don't seek external validation have a different reward system. They still feel pleasure, still feel satisfaction, but the source is different. They've developed the ability to activate this reward system through internal achievements, through alignment with their own values, through progress toward goals they themselves have defined as important. It's as if they've built an internal power plant, while most people depend on external sources of energy. But how does someone develop this capacity? It's not something that happens overnight. Generally, there's a developmental process that begins in childhood and continues throughout life. Some of these people had parents or caregivers who, instead of constantly praising results, taught them to value effort, process, learning. Instead of saying, "You're so smart," they said, "You worked really hard on this." This subtle but profound difference teaches the child to value something that's under their control, the effort, instead of something external, the praise. Other people develop this independence through difficult experiences. Perhaps they went through periods when external validation simply wasn't available. Perhaps they were rejected, criticized, or misunderstood. And in that vacuum of external approval, they were forced to find an internal source of value. It's like a plant that, in poor soil, develops deeper and stronger roots to survive. Adversity, although painful, can be the catalyst for the development of this internal strength. There are also those who arrive at this realization through philosophical or spiritual reflection. They perceive, at some point in their lives, the futility of seeking validation in something as unstable as others' opinions. They recognize that people change, that opinions are volatile, that what is celebrated today can be criticized tomorrow. And faced with this instability, they make a conscious choice to anchor their sense of value in something more stable, something internal. What's fascinating about these people is that they frequently experience lower levels of social anxiety. Think about this for a moment. Social anxiety, to a large extent, comes from fear of others' judgment. If you're not constantly worried about what others think of you, if you're not seeking constant approval, then you naturally experience less anxiety in these situations. You can be yourself, authentic, without the crushing weight of trying to impress or please. This authenticity is perhaps the most striking characteristic of these people. They don't wear elaborate social masks. They aren't chameleons who change their personality depending on who they're with. They are consistent because they're not trying to mold themselves to meet others' expectations. And there's something deeply liberating about this. Imagine not having to remember which version of yourself you presented to different groups of people. Imagine not having to maintain this constant performance. It's exhausting just to think about it, but it's the reality for many people. However, it's important to recognize that not seeking external validation doesn't mean being insensitive or indifferent to others. These are not selfish or narcissistic people. In fact, they are often more empathetic and genuinely interested in others precisely because they're not constantly focused on how they're being perceived. When you're not worried about being judged, you can really listen to others. You can be present in conversations without that internal voice constantly asking, "What are they thinking of me?" These people also tend to make life choices more aligned with their genuine values. They don't choose careers because they're prestigious. They don't buy things to impress the neighbors. They don't stay in relationships because they're afraid of what others will think. Their choices come from a deeper, more authentic place. And even when these choices are difficult or misunderstood by others, they have the internal strength to move forward. Let's consider the example of someone who decides to leave a successful and lucrative career to pursue a passion that pays less but brings more meaning. For most people, this decision would be agonizing, not just because of financial issues, but because of fear of judgment. What will my family think? What will my friends say? Will they think I'm irresponsible? Will they think I failed? These questions can be paralyzing. But someone who doesn't seek external validation makes this evaluation differently. The question isn't what will others think, but rather, is this aligned with my values? Will this bring me genuine satisfaction? Is this what I want for my life? This clarity of purpose is another distinctive trait. Without the constant noise of external opinions, these people can hear their own inner voice more clearly. They know what they want, not because someone told them what they should want, but because they deeply explored their own desires, values, and objectives. It's like comparing listening to music in a quiet environment versus in a place full of noise. In silence, each note is clear and distinct. But not everything is perfect in this journey of independence from external validation. There are challenges and sacrifices. One of the biggest challenges is the loneliness that can sometimes accompany this path. When you're not constantly seeking approval, when your choices aren't dictated by what's popular or accepted, you can find yourself in territories that few have explored. You may make decisions that your friends and family don't understand. And this lack of understanding can create distance. There's also the challenge of being misinterpreted. In a society that values conformity and consensus, someone who genuinely doesn't care about others' opinions can be seen as arrogant or insensitive. People may interpret this independence as contempt. "Oh, he thinks he's better than us," they might think. "She doesn't care about anyone but herself," they might comment. And although these interpretations are often wrong, they can create social friction. Another challenge is navigating relationships. Because even if you don't seek external validation, you still need to function in a society, still need to relate to people who, for the most part, operate differently. How do you maintain healthy relationships with people who constantly seek your approval when you're trying to encourage them to find internal validation? How do you work in corporate environments where politics and impression are the currency of exchange? These people learn to navigate these spaces with a form of conscious diplomacy. They understand that, although they don't need validation, offering genuine recognition to others is an act of kindness and empathy. They learn when to share their opinions and when to simply observe. They develop what could be called social flexibility without losing their core authenticity. It's also interesting to note how these people deal with failure. For most people, failure is devastating not just because of the loss itself, but because of what it means socially. "I'm a failure," they think. "Everyone will see me as inferior." But when you're not constantly measuring your value by what others think, failure simply becomes feedback. It becomes an opportunity for learning, not a sentence about your value as a person. Imagine an entrepreneur whose business fails. If they're constantly seeking external validation, this failure can be crushing. They might avoid leaving the house for fear of what others will say. They might feel deep shame. They might question their fundamental value as a person. But an entrepreneur who doesn't seek external validation looks at the same situation completely differently. "Okay, this project didn't work. What did I learn? What can I do differently next time? My value as a person isn't defined by this result." This psychological resilience is extraordinary. And it doesn't come from a place of denial or not caring about results. It comes from having separated their sense of identity and value from external feedback. It's a subtle but powerful distinction. Throughout history, many of the great innovators, artists, and thinkers were people who didn't seek external validation. Think of scientists who worked on theories for decades, even when the entire scientific community ridiculed them. Think of artists who created works that were only appreciated long after their deaths, but who continued creating because the creation itself was the reward. Think of activists who fought for unpopular causes because they believed it was the right thing to do, not because they expected recognition. These people had something in common, an internal conviction so strong that external noise became irrelevant. They had a moral and creative compass that pointed in the direction they considered true, regardless of how many people agreed or disagreed. But you don't have to be a genius or a hero to develop this independence from external validation. Ordinary people in their daily lives can cultivate this quality. It starts with small steps. It starts with making small decisions based on what you genuinely want, not on what you think you should want. It starts with allowing yourself to like what you like, even if it's not popular. It starts with listening to your inner voice and giving it weight and importance. One of the most powerful exercises to develop this independence is to practice doing things alone and appreciating the experience. Going to the movies alone. Dining at a restaurant alone. Traveling alone. For many people, these activities are terrifying not because of the activity itself, but because of what others might think. People will think I have no friends. They'll feel sorry for me. But when you do these things and realize the world doesn't end, that you can actually enjoy the experience, you begin to break the chains of dependence on external validation. Another crucial aspect is learning to validate yourself. This may seem strange at first. celebrating your own achievements, recognizing your own progress, being kind to yourself when you make mistakes. For many, this seems self-indulgent or arrogant. But it's not. It's simply giving yourself what you would be expecting from others. It's taking responsibility for your own emotional well-being. People who have mastered this develop what psychologists call self-compassion. They treat themselves with the same kindness and understanding they would offer a good friend. When they make mistakes, they don't crucify themselves internally hoping that punishment will make them worthy of external forgiveness. They simply acknowledge the mistake, learn from it, and move on. There's also a spiritual dimension to this journey for many people. They recognize that seeking validation in external things is seeking in empty cisterns. That human recognition is temporary, volatile, and ultimately unsatisfying. Some find validation in something greater than themselves, in universal principles, in a connection with the divine, in a purpose that transcends the individual ego. When you anchor your sense of value in something eternal, in something that doesn't change with fashions or opinions, you find a stability that no amount of likes or praise can provide. You recognize that your value is intrinsic, not earned. That you are valuable not because of what you do or what others think of you, but simply by existing. This is a profound truth that many philosophical and spiritual traditions have taught for millennia. You are already complete. You are already enough. The search for external validation is based on the false premise that you are incomplete, that you need something external to become valuable. But this premise is false from the beginning. Realizing this is not easy. We live in a society that constantly tells us otherwise. That tells us we need to have more, be more, do more to be worthy of love and respect. Advertising bombards us with messages of inadequacy. Social media shows us edited and filtered versions of others' lives, making us feel we're not enough. Our educational and corporate systems often evaluate and rank us, reinforcing the idea that our value is relative and conditional. Breaking this conditioning requires constant vigilance and deliberate practice. It requires questioning the narratives we've internalized. It requires challenging the voices that say you need others' approval to be valuable. It requires cultivating an inner voice stronger than these external messages. And when you start doing this, something remarkable happens. You realize you had much more energy than you imagined. All that energy you were spending worrying about what others thought, trying to impress them, molding yourself to meet their expectations, suddenly becomes available for other things. For genuine creativity. For authentic relationships. For pursuing goals that really matter to you. You also realize that your happiness becomes more stable. No more that emotional roller coaster of highs when you receive praise and lows when you're criticized. No more that constant anxiety about how you're being perceived. There's a fundamental calm, a peace that comes from knowing who you are and being at peace with it. This doesn't mean you never feel negative emotions. You still feel sadness, frustration, disappointment. But these emotions aren't amplified by fear of others' judgment. You can process your emotions more cleanly, more directly, without the additional layers of shame or social anxiety. People who don't seek external validation also tend to have deeper and more meaningful relationships. Because when you're not constantly trying to impress or please, you can be truly vulnerable. You can show your flaws, your doubts, your fears. And this authentic vulnerability is the foundation for genuine human connections. Paradoxically, by stopping seeking everyone's approval, you attract people who appreciate you for who you really are. These relationships are different. They're not based on performance or maintaining an image. They're based on mutual acceptance and authenticity. And although you may have fewer superficial relationships, the relationships you do have are deeper, more satisfying, more real. There's also a remarkable creative freedom in these people. When you're not worried about what others will think, when you're not trying to create something that will be approved or that fits expectations, you can create from a purer, more genuine place. You can experiment, risk, fail, try again. You can follow your curiosity to strange and unexplored places. Many of the greatest works of art, literature, and music were created by people who weren't trying to please an audience. They were exploring something internal, responding to their own creative need. And ironically, It's often this type of authentic work that resonates most deeply with others. Because when something comes from a genuine place, people can feel it. The journey to not seeking external validation also involves learning to be comfortable with discomfort. Because the reality is that sometimes following your own path means disappointing people. It means making choices that others don't approve of. It means being willing to be misunderstood or criticized. And that's uncomfortable. Our natural instinct is to avoid conflict, seek harmony, make everyone like us. But when you can sit with that discomfort, when you can tolerate disapproval without it shaking your sense of value, you gain extraordinary freedom. You can make difficult but necessary choices. You can establish healthy boundaries. You can say no when you need to say no. You can live according to your values even when it's not popular. This strength doesn't come from a place of hardness or insensitivity. It comes from a place of deep self-awareness and self-confidence. These people know who they are. They've done the internal work of examining their values, understanding their motivations, recognizing their strengths and weaknesses. And this self-knowledge creates a solid foundation that isn't easily shaken by external opinions. It's also important to recognize that not seeking external validation exists on a spectrum. No one is completely immune to others' opinions. All of us, at some level, are social creatures who care about what others think. The question isn't to completely eliminate this concern, but rather not to let it dominate your life, your choices, your sense of value. Some people may be more independent in certain areas and less so in others. Perhaps someone is completely independent in their career choices but still seeks validation in romantic relationships. Or vice versa. The important thing is to recognize where you are on this spectrum and consciously work to develop more internal autonomy in areas where dependence on external validation is causing suffering or limiting your life. One of the signs that you might be too dependent on external validation is if you frequently feel resentful. Resentment often arises when we're doing things to please others but not genuinely wanting to do them. When we're living according to others' expectations instead of our own values. If you often find yourself thinking, I do so much for these people and they don't even appreciate it, it may be a sign that you're doing things expecting validation in return. People who don't seek external validation rarely feel resentful because their actions come from a place of genuine choice. They do things for others because they want to, not because they expect recognition. And if they don't want to do something, they have the strength to say no. This honesty with themselves and with others eliminates much of the resentment that can poison relationships. Another sign of dependence on external validation is the constant need to share your achievements. There's a difference between sharing something because you're genuinely excited and want to share your joy, and sharing because you need others to recognize and validate your success. The person who doesn't seek external validation may choose to share or not, but the satisfaction of the achievement doesn't depend on the sharing or others' reaction. Let's also consider how these people deal with criticism. For someone dependent on external validation, criticism can be devastating. It strikes at the core of their identity because that identity is built on others' approval. But for someone with strong internal validation, criticism is just information. It can be useful information that helps them improve, or it can simply be someone's opinion that doesn't need to be taken seriously. They have the ability to evaluate criticism objectively without it shaking their fundamental sense of value. This objectivity is liberating. It means you can really grow and improve because you're not defensive all the time. You can hear feedback without feeling your identity is being attacked. You can discern between constructive criticism worth considering and criticism that's more about the critic than about you. There's also a quality of presence in these people. When you're not constantly worried about how you're being perceived, you can be more present in the moment. You can really listen when someone is speaking, instead of planning what you're going to say to impress. You can appreciate a beautiful landscape without thinking about how you're going to photograph it to show others. You can enjoy a meal without needing to document it. This presence brings a much richer quality of life. The irony is that frequently, the people who least seek external validation are the ones who receive it most. Because there's something magnetic about authenticity. When someone is genuinely themselves, when they're not trying to impress or please, it attracts people. There's an integrity, a consistency that people recognize and respect. But these people don't change when they receive this validation because that's never what they were seeking in the first place. Developing this independence from external validation also fundamentally changes your relationship with time. When you're not constantly seeking approval, you're not living for some future moment when you'll finally be recognized or appreciated. You can find satisfaction in the present, in the process, in the work itself. This doesn't mean you don't have goals or ambitions, but rather that the journey toward these goals is satisfying in itself, not just the destination. This orientation toward process instead of result is characteristic of many of these people. They find joy in the doing, not just in having done. A musician who practices not just for the performance, but because the act of playing is satisfying. A writer who writes not just to be published, but because the creative process is meaningful. An athlete who trains not just to win, but because the challenge and growth are rewarding. When you live like this, external success becomes a bonus, not a necessity. If it comes, great. If it doesn't come, you still have the satisfaction of work well done according to your own standards. This attitude removes enormous pressure and anxiety. You're not betting your happiness on results that are often outside your control. You're finding happiness in what is under your control: your effort, your dedication, your integrity. It's also fascinating to observe how these people deal with success when it comes. For many, success creates a new pressure, the pressure to maintain this level, to continue receiving validation. But for those with strong internal validation, success doesn't fundamentally change who they are. They can appreciate recognition without clinging to it. They can enjoy rewards without defining themselves by them. This equanimity in the face of both success and failure is a mark of wisdom. Recognizing that both are temporary, that both are just experiences along a larger journey. Not letting yourself be inflated too much by success nor devastated too much by failure. Maintaining a calm center regardless of external circumstances. As we approach the end of this exploration, it's worth reflecting on what we can learn from these people. Even if we never achieve total independence from external validation, we can move in that direction. We can question why we do what we do. We can ask ourselves if we're living according to our own values or others' expectations. We can practice self-validation. We can develop the courage to be authentic. The world needs more people like this. People who aren't constantly molding themselves to fit in. People who bring their unique truths to the table. People who lead with authenticity instead of popularity. People who do what's right even when it's not recognized. People who find joy in the journey instead of just in the destination. This is not an easy journey. There will be moments of doubt. There will be moments when others' approval seems very tempting, when the path of conformity seems much simpler. But for those who persist, for those who continue cultivating this internal strength, the rewards are profound. A life lived with authenticity. Relationships based on truth. Achievements that mean something real. And above all, inner peace that doesn't depend on external circumstances. In the end, the psychology of people who don't seek external validation teaches us something fundamental about the human condition. It teaches us that the most important approval is the one we give ourselves. That the most significant judgment is the one we make according to our own values. That the most satisfying life is one lived with authenticity, even when it means walking alone for a while. These people remind us that we were created with intrinsic value, that we don't need to earn our right to exist, that we are already enough. They show us that it's possible to live differently, that we don't need to be slaves to others' opinions. And perhaps, by observing them, we can find courage to listen to our own inner voice, to trust our own judgment, to live according to our own truth. May we find strength in this journey. May we have courage to be authentic. May we find validation not in the temporary applause of the crowd, but in the lasting peace of living aligned with who we really are. May the Lord God guide us on this path of self-discovery and authenticity, illuminating our steps when the path seems uncertain, and giving us strength when the journey becomes difficult. May we find in Him the eternal validation that no human opinion can give or take away.